So the next one is Aristotle. Aristotle is the favorite student of Plato, and while literary criticism concerned with morality with Plato, its emphasis on the elements of which a work is composed began with Aristotle. Aristotle made a detailed investigation of the material world, which he even rejects some of Plato's beliefs about the nature of reality. So Aristotle reveled in the physical world, which is after he studied at Plato's academy, mastering philosophy and techniques in inquiry, he started and founded his own lyceum, which known as Peripatetic School of Athens. It is a school of scientific philosophical thoughts and investigation. And because of his knowledge in investigation, he applied it to the study of literature. He answered Plato's accusation against poetry, its nature, value, and even worth of the artist, and literature itself in his lecture known as Poetics. So Poetics is an esoteric work, which means for private circulation to those who attended the Lyceum. Although it lacks the unity and coherence of Aristotle's other work, it is remain one of the most important critical influence on literary theory and criticism. So Aristotle Poetics became the cornerstone of Western literary criticism by applying his analytic abilities to a definition of tragedy. Aristotle began in his Poetic a discussion of the basic components of a literary work that continues to the present day, up until now. So in Poetics, Aristotle states the general principle of tragedy as he saw them at his time, which he connects in his principles of philosophy. But many critics and scholars mistakenly assume that Poetics is a how-to manual which defines and sets as standards for literature, particularly in tragedy. But according to Aristotle, the purpose of his work is to state the general principle of tragedy as what he viewed them in his time, and to also answer Plato's many arguments and doctrines, and not to formulate rules for evaluation about tragedy. So at the beginning of Poetics, Aristotle notes that epic poetry, tragedy, comedy, the dithyrambic poetry, and most forms of flute and lyre playing all happen to be in generation imitation, although these imitations differ in how and what they imitate. So Aristotle agreed with Plato that all arts are under the roof of imitation, or art is a mere imitation which only exists because people are imitative creatures who enjoys imitation. So Plato and Aristotle have a disagreement between the ideas of imitation, whereas Plato sees the art of poetry as the threat against the order in society. Aristotle sees it as a to may prove helpful in the improvement of the society. So this agreement of Plato and Aristotle have a differing approach towards the idea of imitation. While Plato idea that imitation is two steps removed from the truth or realm of the idea, Aristotle, on the other hand, deems that poetry is more universal, more general than things as they are, because for him, it is not the function of the poetry what has happened, but may happen, and what is possible according to the law of probability or necessity. So comparing it with history, he concludes that poetry is more philosophical, therefore it is a higher things, because rather than the poet, it is the work of historian who writes what has already happened. He also explained that it is the tendency of the poetry to express the universal, which also with the respect of to the universal truth, and as history tends to express the particular or what happened in a particular case. So for Aristotle, poets do not imitate the physical world as it is, but create an imitation of it should be. So now let's compare the comedy with tragedy. In Aristotle's view, not all imitation by poets are the same because writers of a great dignity imitated the noble action heroes. The less dignified sort of writers imitated the action of inferior men. In its most general sense, the comedy imitates the action of ones who are inferior to the audience. So basically, comedy does not reflect those people biases, but what is ridiculous which caused by some errors or ugliness that is painless and has no harmful effect. A tragedy, on the other hand, are analyzed in detail in the poetics. So it is defined as an imitation of a novel and complete action having the proper magnitude. It employs a language that has been artistically enhanced by each of the kind of linguistic adornment applied separately in the various parts of the play. It is presented in dramatic, not narrative form and achieved through the representation of pitiable and fearful incidents, the catharsis of such pitiable and fearful incidents. So based on the definition of Aristotle on tragedy, on what tragedy is, it is like a form of drama that treats in a more serious and dignified style wherein there is a situation of sorrows or terrible events that caused or encountered by a heroic individual. So to sum it up, this complex definition of Aristotle in his Poetics highlights his chief contribution to literary criticism. So number one, tragedy or a work of art is an imitation of nature that reflects a high form of art in exhibiting novel characters and novel deeds. The act of imitation itself is giving us pleasure. Next, tragedy is an organic whole, which means that it has the beginning, a middle, and an end, and its parts are all interrelated to one another. The three unities of time, place, and action all serves to this sense of wholeness. Next, tragic hero is a noble man of a positive character, but he is not faultless, so his misfortunes and ultimate downfall are caused by some errors or frailty in his own character, which is what we call his tragic flaw or hamartia. Next, catharsis is the emotional effect of a tragedy on its audience. It is the purgation or purification of the emotion of the audience by the end of the play. Next, the universal, not the particular, should be stressed. Unlike history that deals with what happened, poetry and tragedy deals with what could happen and is therefore closer to perform or truth than history itself. And last, the poet must give close attention to diction or language, be it verse, prose, or song, but ultimately it is the thoughts expressed through language that are most utmost concern. So next, Horace. So the next one is Horace, or Quintus Horatius Flaccus, that is well known in the English-speaking world as Horace. He was the leading Roman lyric poet during the time of Augustus. He is the one who enjoyed the wealth of and influence of Emperor Augustus and many other members of the Roman aristocracy. In a letter to the sons of one of his friends and patrons, Maecenas, he articulated what became the official canon of literary taste during the Middle Ages, the Renaissance, and in the Neoclassic period. And by reading this letter and his Ars Poetica, or the art of poetry, any Roman aristocrat, middle knight, literary master could learn the standard of good or proper literature. So the concerns in Horace's work are different with Plato and Aristotle. While Plato and Aristotle agree that the poet must and do have imitate nature, Horace, declares poet must imitate other poets. So Horace provided or established the do's and don'ts, or some guidelines on how to be a good writer. So his advices basically includes that poets should imitate other poets, especially the poets of the past and particularly the Greek. Next, should write about traditional subject in a unique way. Next, poets should avoid all extremes in subject matter, the diction, vocabulary, and style, gaining mastery in these skills by reading and following the examples of the classical Greek and Roman authors. And lastly, should avoid appearing ridiculous and must therefore aim their sight low, not attempting to be a new Virgil or a Homer. So Horace declares that literature's ultimate aim is dulce et utile, which means to be sweet and useful. He asserts that the best writings are both teach and delight, and to be able to achieve it, poet must understand their audience. It is the poet's task to combine usefulness and delight in the same literary work. So Horace up for giving the world the writer, particularly guidelines for authors' craft while living unattended and unchallenged by many of the philosophical concerns of Plato and Aristotle. Because for Horace, a poet's greatest reward is in the adulation of the public.